It was on this date, 250 years ago, that Paul Revere undertook his famous midnight ride.
On the night of April 18th, 1775, Revere and the Sons of Liberty alerted minutemen that British troops were approaching. The whole event was laid out today in a presentation at the Maine Historical Society in Portland. Historian Tom Putnam explained that the sexton of Boston's Old North Church used a lantern signal to warn colonists that the troops were coming up the Charles River. Paul Revere, William Dawes, and Samuel Prescott then rode out by horse to warn other patriots. They were caught by a British Army patrol in Lincoln. Prescott and Dawes escaped, but Revere was briefly detained. 80 years later, Maine poet Henry Wadsworth Longfellow wrote a poem about the Revolutionary Act on the eve of the country going to war with itself.
These are the words of Jill Lepore. Longfellow hoped that recounting the dramatic tale of a Revolutionary War hero would waken his slumbering contemporaries to face the challenges of their time. But he pens the last words on October 13th, 1860, and then in November of 1860 he votes for Abraham Lincoln. The poem was first published in the Atlantic Monthly in its January 1861 issue, but that issue actually makes it to the newsstands in Boston on December 20th, 1860, which is the very day that South Carolina seceded from the Union.
Paul Revere lived another 40 years after the start of the Revolutionary War. An interesting note, his midnight ride was not mentioned in his obituary. Meanwhile, the Battle of Lexington and Concord that followed the famous midnight ride is widely considered the start of the American Revolution.
But it wasn't the first act of belligerence as tension between the colonies and the Crown rose. In December of 1774, 4 months before the Battle of Lexington and Concord, Paul Revere carried out a similar alarm ride in Portsmouth, New Hampshire. He had learned that British troops were coming to take the gunpowder stores they had at Fort William and Mary. Locals supportive of separating from England raided the fort, which was only defended by 6 soldiers, and seized the gunpowder before the Brits could take it. Today, that fort is called Fort Constitution. We also now know that while the British had discussed taking the gunpowder, they had never actually issued the order to take it. Now, after the war, Paul Revere turned back to his business as a silversmith, which he then grew into a pretty big metalworking empire. By the turn of the century, his company was manufacturing bells.
In 2003, a bell made by Revere's son was rehabilitated and returned to its place on the steeple at the Old Town Hall in Durham. In 2009, the restoration of a Revere bell and the clock that controlled when it ran was completed with a Valentine's Day celebration in Kennebunk. Caroline Cornish has the story.
1856. You can see the writing on the wall.
This one says 1856.
The names of many, many Mainers who have climbed the clock tower at the First Parish Unitarian Universalist Church in Kennebunk. They're just one symbol of how much history is stored up inside this building. Ian Durham is the church's historian.
This is a genuine Paul Revere bell. We have evidence that Paul Revere himself came up here to test it.
For 100 years, the Paul Revere bell used to sound every hour, triggered by an E. Howard and Company clock that ticked the minutes away downstairs.
This clock is, when they first made it, was supposedly accurate to 15 seconds, to within 15 seconds, like a month, which is pretty amazing considering it was put in 1885. Right.
But in 1998, time ran out for this clock. Church members had installed an electric winder in the 1970s that stripped its gears over time. The church steeple also needed repairs, so for the past 10 years, parishioners have raised money and contracted workers to restore the whole tower.
Having historically significant stuff is very expensive and very hard to maintain. And we're a small congregation, and it's very hard to find the funds to maintain these things.
Now the time has come to celebrate the project's completion. Visitors give the restored clock a ringing endorsement.
This clock is really cool
because it was like really loud and it was fun.
Young Xander Davenport helped his grandfather cut the ribbon way up in the tower.
That's it.
It all went like clockwork. Thanks to the hard work of this community, this clock should continue to ring true to its mission for another 100 years.
Caroline Cornish reporting in 2009. That church, by the way, is now where Kennebunk carries out its New Year's blueberry drop.